It was a nice way to grow up, being around music all the time, being around creative people. And I swear to God, some of those people who played were just incredible. You know, some of them could read, some of them couldn't. Joe Bianchi, I got some recordings I'll play for Joe. Joe Bianchi was a little Italian guy that lived out on 2nd Street. I used to watch his right hand with his picking hand when I was a kid. I said, oh man, this guy would dance on the strings. I have all those recordings here. My friend Dave, years ago, I took the disc. Oh, by the way, Joe just went to the house, and I asked him to bring down some discs. This is what they look like back in those days. And they're all 78. And my dad cut these on that machine that he made, or not made, but modified. And I used to have that little brush here somewhere. There was a little brush that when my one brother, Bill, the one who did the Batman over there, while my dad was recording, Bill used to take that brush and keep the disc, all the chips that came up, and get them out of the way so it would clear the field, And my dad always said Bill was the only one he trusted doing that because Bill had the touch of an angel. His hands were so light, there's no way that he's going to bump the needle, I get in there, it'd be a disaster. Anyway, later on I transferred those to some cassettes, and I gave one of them to Dave, and he made some CDs for me. On these recordings, I'm not going to play all the recordings because it's too long, but I just wanted to give you some samplings of what was available. And there are all recordings of my dad playing this guitar. There's also a recording of my dad playing mandolin. And Kenny Hoyer, I mentioned Kenny Hoyer. He was a guy that lived up on around the corner, not too far from where I grew up. And Kenny was the very first, he was younger than all the other guys were up in their age, but Kenny was a young man. And he played a whole different style of guitar than everybody else. Most of those guys were first position players. And they played, most of them, my dad definitely played fingerstyle, where he played like a lot of bass notes with his thumb. Dun 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 ding ding dun, like that kind of stuff. And when Kenny came in, Kenny didn't play like that. He played, well, he wasn't Freddie Green, the guitar player with Count Basie, but it was in that style, where he played what they call staccato kind of rhythm, ching, 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 like that. And Kenny could play like, first time I saw anybody actually play 13th chords and stuff. And Kenny was one of the first guys to say, hey, Carl, you're going to learn up. He gave me some hints on how to play some things. But when that happened, when Kenny came in, there was no more bass notes, And there was a guy, I don't remember his name, played the upright bass. It was a friend of my dad's, and my dad thought he would have that guy come down. And they did that for a while. I never even heard that, and there are no recordings that I know of that. But my dad tried to amplify that bass, he tried it with a microphone, and it was just getting too much feedback, and tried to make a pickup for it, and it wasn't working. But there was an old K guitar laying around. And my dad thought, well, maybe I could string that up with some piano strings and tune it down an octave and make a pickup that would pick up some of the lower frequencies, And basically, what it turned out to be was an electric bass. The scale was very short because it was a guitar. It wasn't a 34. It wasn't a 38. Again, George Washington did not have a cell phone, man. He just didn't. It was the beginning. And my dad did that. And the strings he put on were, I'm pretty sure they were piano strings, because there was Obviously, there was no electric bass string. Talk about trying to get a 6-string bass set. For him, there wasn't even a bass string because there were no basses. There were nothing. It had to start somewhere. I always think about Pete. I'm going to use that a lot. Pete always gives me credit for it had to start somewhere, Carl, you know. And you know, while I'm talking about this, I think about Bass Player magazine too, you know. I pretty much said all this to them, this whole story about my dad, and I even sent them recordings, the whole batch of recordings, everything. You know, nothing. You know. That should have been a front page story. You got somebody who's supposed to be a famous bass maker today, you know. That's me. I didn't ask for it, I guarantee you. You wouldn't want it if you knew what it cost. Anyway, you know, and this person's dad did all these things, and you know, no. Well, they missed the boat, and I don't want them to do it either. I'm doing it right now. And it's the truth. And it is the truth. Anyway, that bass that he made, he tuned it originally like the mandolin, down an octave. And the reason he did that was because almost everybody that he hung out with, everybody played the mandolin. Not everybody played the guitar. So he figured if he was going to use that thing at all, he could hand it to any one of those guys, and at least they could finger the right notes. I mean, maybe not the world's greatest bass players, but at least they could know where the notes were, you know. And oh, the other thing about that, too, the strings. Piano strings have a steel core, and the wrapping with brass, you know. The magnetic field on standard pickups doesn't pick up brass strings very well because the brass kind of gets in the way. I really don't understand that completely, but I guess it's for the magnetic field to reach that core going through the brass. You can get a signal, but especially when my dad was trying to get a signal in that register, it was really hard. So he had some kind of paint. I think he called it electromagnetic paint. I have no idea, you know. But he painted the strings right around where the pickup was. He figured that way he could get a stronger signal from the strings. You know, I mean, this is what it is. When you don't have it, this is what you do. You don't just say, "Oh, I got to get a pickup. I'll call EMG." No, you don't do that. It didn't exist. None of that stuff existed. So that's where the first string, as far as I knew, like when Fender came out with the electric bass, no question about it, they did what they did. But as far as I was concerned, I mean, as a little boy, like 1948, 49, by that time I was 10 years old, you know, and I was playing a little bit, you know. I remember playing that thing, you know. I even have recordings. None of them are here right now. I have to dig those out. But I actually have recordings of me playing with my dad, you know, when I was maybe 12 years old, you know. And my dad would be playing the steel guitar, and I would play the chords, you know. And I remember doing that. I'd like to have a video. It would be nice to have a video of that. Because I remember my dad, you know, he would teach me how to play this chord and that chord and this chord. And when he would play, he would, just so I wouldn't make any mistakes in where we are, you know, how that, when to change chords, so to speak, you know. He would go like this. Like this is the C chord, this is a G chord, here's the F chord up here, you know. He'd be playing along and he'd be going, and then he'd go like this, and I immediately go over and play the F chord or whatever it was, you know, and back. And I remember I used to, after a while, my head would be doing the same thing he was doing. You know. That's why I think that a video like that would have been cool. Of course, we couldn't do it. There was no videos in those days, you know. But that would have been nice seeing a little boy and his dad, you know, both going like this and trying to play, you know. And I have some of those recordings somewhere. They do exist, you know. I also have some nice, very nice recordings of my brother, the one who did the Batman. Besides that, he was a really good singer, you know. And I have, much later on, like when I was 17, 18 years old by that time, you know, I was playing in bands and I could play a 13th chord, you know, and stuff like that. And we have some nice recordings of my brother singing some nice songs, and I accompanied him. Somewhere along the line, I'll dig those out too. But I think I'd like to play some of those recordings, okay? I think I'll put the microphone down there. Or I can turn it. I probably won't even have to. It should be all set. I have it there. Oh yeah, on these recordings, my dad, he made this tape for me. Oh, I don't know when he did that, probably in the 60s sometime. He made a tape. He took the discs and transferred them to a reel-to-reel, you know. And he talks on this tape too, because he was like announcing the songs, and I think he opens up with, these recordings were made on home type recording in 1942. I think he just made that date up because a lot of this stuff was done before that, you know. I know that for a fact. And some of it was done later, you know. But I think he just said 1942, you know. And when he speaks, it's kind of hard to hear him. The microphone was, you know, and he was getting up in years, and he died of cancer, so it's hard to hear him sometimes, but he did it. I mentioned something else about those recordings. Those early recordings, like I said, were all done on a disc. There's one recording on here that my dad did a multiple recording with. That means he played two parts himself. And the way he did it, before reel-to-reel came, first it was disc, which that was pretty standard in those days. But before tape, there was a thing called a wire recorder. It was like a spool of wire. It looked like solder, except it was real, real thin. And that was, the signal was put on there. And the multiple recording that he made of him playing the steel guitar, and he accompanied himself on this guitar. And the way he did it was, he took one part, he played like, say, he took the steel guitar and recorded it on a disc. And then he put a new disc in and recorded the chords on another disc. And then he took those two discs and fed them into a wire recorder. So he got both of those onto the wire. And then he took that recording on the wire and fed that back into the disc. So I had the original disc of that. Now, again, when Les Paul, of course, invented